Hello everybody! Now we are going to speak about terrorism. What is terrorism? Terrorism is not new, and even though it has been used since the early times of recorded history, it can be relatively hard to define terrorism. Terrorism has been described variously as both a tactic and strategy, a crime and a holy duty, a justified reaction to oppression, and an excusable abomination. Obviously, a lot depends on whose point of view is being represented. Terrorism has often been an effective tactic for the weaker side in a conflict. As an asymmetric form of conflict, it confers coercive power with many of the advantages of military force at a fraction of the cost. Due to the secretive nature and small size of terrorist organization, they often offer opponents to clear organization to defend against or to deter. That is why preemption is being considered to be so important. In some cases, terrorism has been a means to carry on a conflict without the adversary realizing the nature of the threat, mistaking terrorism for criminal activity. Because of these characteristics, terrorism has become increasingly common among those pursuing extreme goals throughout the world. The United States Department of Defense defines terrorism as the calculated use of unlawful violence or threat of unlawful violence to inculcate a fear intended to coerce or to intimidate government or societies in the pursuit of goals that are general, political, religious, or ideological. Within these definitions, there are three key elements: violence, fear, and intimidation. And each element produces terror in its victims. Outside the United States government, there are greater variation in what features of terrorism are emphasized in definitions. The United Nations produced the following definition of terrorism in 1992. An anxiety-inspiring methods of repeated violent action employed by semi-clandestine or clandestine individual, group, or state actors for idiosyncratic, criminal, or political reasons, whereby, in contrast to assassination, the direct targets of violence are not the main targets. Less specific and considerably less verbose, the British government definition of terrorism from 1974 is the use of violence for political ends and includes any use of violence for the purpose of putting the public or any section of the public in fear. Terrorism is a criminal act that influences an audience beyond the immediate victim. The strategy of terrorists is to commit acts of violence that draws the attention of the local populace, the government, and the world to their cause. The terrorists plan their attack to obtain the greatest publicity, choosing targets that symbolize what they oppose. The effectiveness of the terrorist act lies not in the act itself, but in the public's or government's reaction to the act. For example, In 1972, at the Munich Olympics, the Black September organization killed 11 Israelis. The Israelis were immediate victims, but the true target was estimated 1 billion people watching the televised event. Those billion people watching were to be introduced to fear, which is terrorism's ultimate goal. The introduction of this fear can be from the threat of physical harm or grisly death, financial terrorism from the fear of losing money or negative effects on the economy, cyber terrorism harming the critical technological infrastructures of society, and psychological terrorism designed to influence people's behavior. Terrorism is designed to produce an overreaction, and anecdotally it succeeds at that almost all the time. The Black September organization used high visibility of the Munich Olympics to publicize its views on the plight of the Palestinian refugees. Similarly, in October 1983, Middle Eastern terrorists bombed the Marine Battalion landing team headquarters at Beirut International Airport. Their immediate victims were the 241 U.S. military personnel who were killed and over 100 others who were wounded. Their true target was the American people and the U.S. Congress. Their one act of violence influenced the United States decision to withdraw the Marines from Beirut and was therefore considered a terrorist success. There are three perspectives of terrorism: the terrorists, the victims, and the general public's ones. The phrase "one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter" is a view terrorists themselves would gladly accept. Terrorists do not see themselves as evil. They believe they are legitimate combatants fighting for what they believe in, by whatever means possible to attain their goals. A victim of a terrorist act sees the terrorist as criminal with no regard for human life. Thank you very much for your attention.